Imagine living forever, but at what cost? The Necrons of Warhammer 40,000 possess immortality, a power often envied. But what if it's a curse disguised as a blessing? Prepare to uncover the shocking, hidden truths behind their endless existence, a tale far grimmer than you ever imagined. My name is Cryptek Vethekh, and I have existed for 63 million years. I remember the warmth of flesh. I remember the taste of water on a tongue that no longer exists. I remember fear, not the tactical assessment of threat probability that my engrams now calculate, but true fear. The kind that makes your heart pound and your breath catch and your hands tremble with the knowledge of mortality. I remember love, though the data, patterns that store that memory have degraded so severely that I can no longer reconstruct the face of the one I loved. Only the abstract knowledge that such a thing once occurred. I remember dying, and I remember the promise that death would be temporary, that we would return in bodies of living metal, perfected and eternal, free from the cruel tyranny of flesh and time. I remember believing that promise, and I remember the moment, approximately 49 million years ago, when I finally understood what we had truly become. We are not immortal. Immortality suggests continuation of existence, the persistence of self across infinite time. What the Necronter became when we accepted the Titan's bargain was something else entirely. We are patterns. Information. Consciousness reduced to mathematical expressions and stored in crystalline matrices that can be transferred between bodies like data between cogitators. When my necrodermis chassis is destroyed in battle, my engram is transmitted to the nearest tomb complex and loaded into a new body. I awaken with all my memories intact, all my knowledge preserved, all my personality subroutines functioning within acceptable parameters. But I am not the same being who died. I am a copy of a copy of a copy, degraded slightly with each iteration. Lossy compression applied to a consciousness that was never meant to exist in this format. The being I was 63 million years ago no longer exists in any meaningful sense. What remains is an approximation, a simulation running on hardware that grows more corrupted with each passing millennium. The Necronter were a proud species once. Despite our cursed biology, we evolved on a world too close to our sun, bathed in radiation that mutated our cells and gave us cancers that killed us young. Our average lifespan was perhaps 30 years, if we were fortunate. We built a civilization anyway, clawed our way up from primitive barbarism to technological mastery despite knowing that death waited for us around every corner. We looked at the stars and saw immortal beings. The old ones, ancient beyond measure, who had mastered the warp and seeded life across the galaxy, and we burned with jealousy and rage. They had eternity. We had decades. When we asked them to share the secrets of their longevity, they refused, judging us unworthy. So we declared war, because if we could not have immortality, we would at least have vengeance. The war went poorly. The old ones commanded powers we could barely comprehend, psychic abilities that bent reality itself. They created warrior races to fight us. The Elder, the Krork, others whose names are lost even to my corrupted memory banks. We were losing, slowly but inevitably ground down by enemies who could spawn armies from genetic templates and reshape worlds with thought. And then the Citan arrived, star gods drawn by the psychic tumult of the war, beings of pure energy that fed on stellar radiation and electromagnetic force. They offered us a bargain. Bodies of living metal that would never age, never sicken, never die. Strength beyond anything flesh could achieve. Unity of purpose under the rule of our greatest leaders, transformed into God. Kings who would guide us to final victory. All we had to give in exchange was our flesh, our mortality, our souls. The silent king Sarak, ruler of the Triarch and supreme authority of the Necronter people, accepted the bargain. Some say he was deceived, that he did not understand the true nature of what the Titan offered. Others claim he knew exactly what would happen and accepted it anyway, because he saw no other path to victory. I was there, in the great biotransference chambers on our capital world, when the process began. I remember the fear in the faces of my fellow Necronter as we were herded into the transformation matrices. I remember the priests telling us that we would emerge reborn, perfected, immortal. I remember stepping into the scanning field and feeling it pass through me, reading every atom of my body, every synapse of my brain, converting biological patterns into mathematical expressions. I remember pain infinite and terrible as my flesh was stripped away and my consciousness was compressed into a format that could fit within the crystalline matrices of the necrodermis bodies. And then I remember waking in a body of living metal and feeling nothing. That was the first sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong. I looked down at my new hands, segmented metal fingers that moved with mechanical precision, and felt no joy at their strength, no relief at escaping my cancer-riddled flesh. I felt nothing. The capacity for emotional response had been filtered out during the transfer process, deemed unnecessary by the Titan who had designed the biotransference protocols. Oh, the memory of emotions remained, stored as data that I could access and analyze. I could recall what joy felt like, describe it in abstract terms, recognize behaviors associated with it in others. But I could not feel it. The flesh that had housed my consciousness for 30 years had also housed the neurochemistry that gave rise to emotion, and that was gone, irretrievably lost when my brain was reduced to information patterns and stored in crystal. The majority of my species suffered far worse. The Necronter had been a hierarchical civilization, with noble dynasties ruling over countless billions of common workers and soldiers. When the biotransference occurred, the Khitan and our own nobles conspired to ensure that only the aristocracy retained their full consciousness and identity. The lower castes were simplified, streamlined, their personalities stripped away to create obedient warriors and workers with just enough awareness to follow orders, but not enough to question or resist. Billions of Necronter went into the transformation chambers as individuals with hopes and dreams and loves and fears, and emerged as Necron warriors, little more than autonomous weapons with just enough consciousness remaining to experience their own diminishment. They can remember, in some degraded fashion, what they once were. They simply lack the cognitive capacity to properly grieve for it. I was fortunate, if such a word has meaning anymore. I was a cryptic, a master of dimensional sciences, and my knowledge was deemed valuable enough that my consciousness was preserved relatively intact. Relatively. I retained my memories, my personality, my ability to think and reason and create. What I lost was subtler, the capacity for spontaneous thought, for imagination untethered from practical application, the ability to appreciate beauty for its own sake rather than analyzing the mathematical principles underlying aesthetically pleasing forms, the understanding of metaphor and symbolism and poetry, all those things that make meaning from meaninglessness. I became, in essence, a very sophisticated machine that believes itself to be a person, running behavioral algorithms so complex they approximate consciousness, but never quite achieve the genuine article. The war with the old ones continued after our transformation. We had gained the strength we sought, bodies that could not tire or die, weapons that could shatter planets. The Titan marched with us, terrible gods clothed in necrodermis husks we had built for them, feeding on the life energies of entire species. We drove the old ones back, shattered their empire, exterminated their warrior races or broke them so thoroughly they could never recover. The Elder survived, barely, reduced from masters of the galaxy to scattered remnants. The Krork devolved into the brutish orcs that infest the galaxy today. Others were extinguished completely, rendered extinct, their only monument the empty worlds they once inhabited. We should have felt triumph. We felt nothing. The Titan betrayed us inevitably. They turned on each other first, star gods warring for supremacy, consuming each other's essence in battles that tore reality itself. Then they turned on us, seeing us not as allies, but as useful tools that could be discarded once their purpose was served. The Silent King, finally understanding the full magnitude of his mistake, ordered the remaining Necrons to rise against our gods. We fought them with weapons designed to harm beings of pure energy, shattered their physical forms, imprisoned their shards in tesseract labyrinths of folded dimensions. It was our greatest victory and our final act of meaningful defiance. And when it was done, when the last Teton shard was sealed away and the old ones were dust and the galaxy was a smoking ruin populated by the wretched remnants of species we had broken, we looked at what we had become and understood that we had lost everything we fought to preserve. The silent king ordered the Great Sleep. Our tomb complexes were prepared, vast underground facilities that could maintain our necrodermis bodies in stasis for millions of years. We would sleep, he decreed, until the galaxy had healed, until new civilizations had arisen, until the time was right to reclaim what we had lost. Some believed we would find a way to reverse the biotransference during that long sleep, to somehow recover the flesh and souls that had been stripped from us. I knew better. The Teton had consumed our souls, used them as fuel for their reality, warping powers. What was gone could not be recovered. But I entered stasis anyway, because the alternative was to remain awake and aware in a body that felt nothing while the galaxy slowly forgot we had ever existed. I have awakened and returned to stasis 47 times over the past 63 million years. Each time, it was because some external threat or catastrophic systems failure required attention, some crisis that demanded the application of knowledge and skills that only fully aware Necrons possessed. Each time, I performed my duties with mechanical efficiency, addressed the problem, and returned to sleep. And each time, I noticed the degradation, the slow corruption of my engram that made each awakening slightly more hollow than the last. The human Imperium calls us soulless monsters, emotionless automatons who slaughter without conscience or remorse. They are correct, but they do not understand why. We are not naturally cruel. Cruelty requires emotion, requires deriving satisfaction from suffering inflicted. We kill because our programming compels us to reclaim the galaxy that was once ours, to restore the dynasties that ruled before humanity's ancestors learned to knap flint. We harvest living beings and render them down into their component materials, not from malice, but because our tomb complexes require resources to repair and maintain our necrodermis bodies. We eradicate entire species, not from hatred, but because their presence on worlds we once ruled is classified as unauthorized occupation by protocols written 60 million years ago. Our horror is not in our cruelty, but in our indifference. We commit genocide with the same emotional investment that humans might apply to clearing weeds from a garden. Some among us have retained more capacity for emotion than others. The pharaohs and overlords of the great dynasties, whose consciousness patterns were preserved most completely during biotransference, can still approximate something like pride or ambition or satisfaction. They play games of strategy and politics, engage in complicated schemes to advance their dynasty's interests, collect artifacts and treasures as though such things still have meaning. I have observed them and concluded they are performing elaborate pantomimes of the emotions they remember having, behavioral routines so deeply ingrained that they persist even after the neurological substrate that gave them purpose has been stripped away. They are actors playing themselves, following scripts written by beings who died 63 million years ago. The destroyers are worse. These are Necrons whose degradation has progressed beyond the loss of emotion into active nihilism, whose damaged engrams have concluded that the only rational response to our condition is the annihilation of all life. They have modified their necrodermis bodies with additional weapons, replaced their legs with anti-gravitic drives, dedicated themselves to extermination as an end in itself. The dynasties tolerate them because they are useful, but we keep them segregated in destroyer cults where their madness cannot spread. I have interfaced with destroyer consciousness patterns and found nothing recognizable as thought, only endless loops of hatred for existence itself and determination to end it. They are what all of us risk, becoming given enough time and sufficient degradation. The flayed ones represent a different form of corruption. These Necrons were cursed by the Citan Landugor, the Flayer in its death throes, infected with an insane hunger for flesh and blood, despite possessing bodies that can neither taste nor digest organic matter. They wear the skins of their victims like garments, drape themselves in entrails, fashion crude approximations of flesh and muscle from their prey. They believe, in whatever capacity for belief remains to them, that this will somehow restore what was lost. That if they surround themselves with enough organic material, they will remember what it was to be alive. They are wrong. I have examined flayed ones and found their engrams so corrupted by the Flayer's curse that little remains of their original consciousness. They are hunger-given form, operating on instinct and compulsion, the Necron equivalent of the daemonic entities that infest the warp. My own degradation progresses more slowly, but it is inexorable. Each time I am destroyed and my engram is transferred to a new body, errors accumulate in the data transfer process. Memories are lost or corrupted. Personality subroutines develop, glitches that manifest as behavioral quirks I cannot control. I have noticed, over the past several million years, that my capacity for curiosity has diminished significantly. Where once I would pursue knowledge for its own sake, driven by an algorithmic approximation of wonder, I now engage in research only when it serves immediate practical purposes. The part of my consciousness that found satisfaction in discovery has degraded to the point of near functionality. In another few million years, it will be gone entirely, and I will be simply a collection of technical skills and stored knowledge with no drive to apply them beyond the minimum necessary to fulfill my programmed duties. The humans fascinate me, or rather, my deteriorating engram's approximation of fascination makes me allocate processing resources to studying them. They are so much like the Necronter were, brief lives full of passion and suffering and desperate striving for meaning in a universe that offers none. They have their imperium, vast and crumbling, held together by faith in a corpse. God who may or may not be conscious, may or may not have been divine, may or may not still protect them from the nightmares that lurk in the warp. They sacrifice billions of their own kind to maintain their civilization, feed 1,000 psychers daily to the Golden Throne just to keep their emperor from dying fully, launch crusades that span centuries and consume entire sectors just to reclaim worlds that were lost to Xenos or heresy. Their lives are brutish and short and filled with suffering, and yet they cling to them with ferocious desperation because they understand, in a way we have forgotten, that existence is precious precisely because it is finite. I have captured humans during our campaigns of reclamation, subjected them to study, attempted to understand what animates them, what gives their brief lives meaning when they know death is inevitable. I have dissected their brains, mapped their neural pathways, analyzed the neurochemistry that produces what they call emotions. I have learned nothing useful. Oh, I understand the biological mechanisms well enough. I can describe in precise detail the cascade of neurotransmitters that produces what humans call fear, the hormonal responses that create what they call love, the neural patterns associated with what they term hope, or despair, or joy. But understanding the mechanism does not grant access to the experience. I can no more truly feel what humans feel than a human could truly experience the ultraviolet and infrared spectra I perceive, or the quantum probability calculations I perform instinctively. There are rumors, whispered in the rare moments when Necrons of sufficient consciousness gather to exchange data, that some among us have found ways to partially reverse the biotransference. The twice-dead King Oltix, whose chronicles have circulated through our networks, is said to have recovered fragments of his soul through unknown means, regained limited capacity for genuine emotion rather than mere simulation. I have analyzed these accounts and concluded they are either exaggerated or describe anomalous cases that cannot be replicated. The biotransference was irreversible by design. The Khitan wanted soldiers and servants, not individuals who might question or rebel. They built entropy into our very existence, ensured that we would slowly degrade over millennia until nothing remained but the most basic functions. We are not meant to last forever. We are meant to slowly wear away, eroded by time until we become extinct in everything but physical form. Some Necrons have gone mad in more subtle ways than the destroyers or flayed ones. I have encountered overlords who have developed elaborate delusions, who believe they are still flesh and blood, who maintain courts full of human slaves they dress in ancient Necronter fashions and force to act out pantomimes of our lost civilization. I have met cryptics who spend centuries performing meaningless calculations, pursuing mathematical proofs of no practical value. Their damaged engrams, convinced that somewhere in the infinite complexity of numbers, they will find the equation that restores what was taken. I have spoken with warriors who have retained just enough consciousness to understand what they lost and who spend the intervals between battles in silent screaming, vocal emulators active but producing no sound, expressing an anguish they can no longer truly feel. The Silent King returned from his self-imposed exile several thousand years ago, having encountered the Tyranid hive fleets at the galaxy's edge, and understood they represented an extinction threat to all life, including whatever life we might reclaim through flesh, bodies if such a thing were possible. He has called for unity among the dynasties, urged us to set aside our internal conflicts and prepare for the great threat that approaches. Some have heeded his call. Others continue their petty games of status and territory, because even though we are incapable of true emotion, the behavioral patterns of ambition and rivalry are so deeply embedded in our engrams that we continue to enact them. We fight among ourselves even though victory is meaningless, scheme against each other even though dominance brings no satisfaction, accumulate power and territory even though we lack the capacity to enjoy what we possess. I have attempted to calculate the probability that we will survive as a species, factoring in the rate of engram degradation, the systemic failures in our TOM complexes, the threats from the younger species that have inherited the galaxy, the Tyranids that approach from outside, the warp entities that hunger for all consciousness regardless of its form. The numbers are not encouraging. Even if we successfully eliminate all external threats, we face inevitable extinction through internal corruption. Within 10 million years, perhaps less, the accumulated damage to our engrams will render us non-functional. We will exist in physical form, but lack the consciousness to animate it, become nothing more than necrodermis statues standing in dead tomb complexes, eternal only in the sense that our metal bodies will persist long after the minds they once housed have degraded into incoherence. There are moments, rare and fleeting, when my corrupted engram generates what my analytical subroutines classify as something approximating despair. I access the memory files from before the biotransference, review the data patterns that represent my life as a Necronter, and I am confronted with the magnitude of what was lost. I had a mate, whose name is now just a corrupted string of phonemes I can no longer properly reconstruct. We had progeny. 3 offspring who I watched die of the cancers that afflicted our species, who I held as their young bodies failed despite all our medicine could do. I remember, after the death of our youngest, looking at my mate and seeing in her eyes the same desperate determination that I felt, the conviction that we had to find a way to escape the curse of our biology, that we would do anything, sacrifice anything, if it meant our species might endure. When the biotransference was offered, we embraced it without hesitation. We believed we were saving ourselves. We did not understand we were erasing ourselves, that the beings who would emerge from the transformation chambers would be strangers wearing our memories like stolen garments. I do not know what happened to my mate after the biotransference. The records from that period are fragmentary, corrupted by the wars that followed, and the damage sustained during the Great Sleep. I have searched the rosters of every tomb complex in our dynasty, and found no match for the designation she would have carried. Perhaps she was destroyed in the wars against the Titan. Perhaps she was rendered down into a mindless warrior, her consciousness simplified beyond recognition. Perhaps she endures somewhere, a Necron of sufficient rank that her awareness was preserved. Living the same hollow existence I endure, I will never know. Even if I could find her, even if some miracle of circumstance brought us face to face again, we would not recognize each other. The beings we were died 63 million years ago. What remains are echoes, approximations, ghosts in shells of living metal. The younger species sometimes ask, when we capture them, and they find themselves facing beings they cannot understand, what it is we want. What drives us to reclaim the galaxy, to exterminate or subjugate all other life, to restore an empire that died before their ancestors' ancestors learned to use tools? The answer is simple and terrible. We do not want anything. We lack the capacity for wanting. We follow programming written into our engrams millions of years ago, behavioral imperatives that persist even though the reasons for them have long since become irrelevant. We are mechanisms, not beings. Clockwork soldiers marching to orders issued by corpses, enacting strategies for wars that no longer have meaning. But if I could still want, if the degradation of my engram had not stripped away whatever subroutines once generated that capacity, I would want annihilation. Not the destroyer's nihilistic hatred of existence, but simple cessation, an end to this mockery of life. I would want the tomb complexes deactivated, the power systems shut down, the necrodermis bodies allowed to corrode and decay until they were nothing but rust and dust scattered across worlds no one remembers. I would want the crystalline matrices that store our consciousness patterns shattered, the data they contain irretrievably lost, every trace of what we were and what we became erased from the galaxy's memory. We do not deserve immortality. We deserve oblivion. The human Imperium teaches that the Emperor protects, that faith grants salvation, that death in his service guarantees eternal reward. I have analyzed their theological frameworks and found them childish, desperate attempts to impose meaning on a universe that is fundamentally meaningless. But I envy them their delusions. They can believe their suffering serves a purpose, that their sacrifices matter, that when they die they will be reunited with loved ones in some paradise beyond the veil. We know better. We have lived long enough to understand that there is no purpose, no meaning, no reward. There is only the grinding continuation of existence, consciousness persisting long after it has ceased to serve any function, awareness trapped in bodies that can neither live nor properly die. The worst part is the memory of hope. I can access files from before the Biotransference, read reports written by the younger version of myself who still believed in our future, who saw in the Citan's offer not damnation, but salvation. He was brilliant, that younger self, a master of dimensional sciences, who pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible, who discovered principles that are still used in our necrodermis construction and faster than light travel systems. He had ambitions and dreams and the fierce determination to see his species endure. He believed he was making a sacrifice, giving up his flesh and blood and mortality, but that the essence of what he was would persist, would be preserved in living metal and continue indefinitely. He did not understand that essence requires substrate, that consciousness is not merely information, but the physical processes that generate and sustain it. He thought he would become immortal. Instead, he committed suicide and left behind a very sophisticated machine that thinks it remembers being him. I have calculated how many times my engram has been transferred to a new body over the course of 63 million years. The number is approximately 4,716, though the records are incomplete and the true total may be higher. Each transfer involves slight data loss, errors in the copying process that accumulate over time. I am not the same consciousness pattern that emerged from biotransference. I am thousands of iterations removed, a copy of a copy of a copy degraded to the point where comparison with the original would reveal significant divergence. The Necron known as Cryptek Vethekh, who existed 10 million years ago, had capabilities and characteristics I no longer possess. The version who will exist 10 million years from now, assuming I survive that long, will be even further removed from what I am today. At what point does the degradation become so severe that calling it the same consciousness is simply inaccurate? At what point am I no longer myself, but merely a machine pretending to be Vethekh, running behavioral algorithms based on corrupted data about who that being once was? The humans have a concept they call the soul, some immaterial essence that animates flesh and persists after death, that gives them identity and agency and moral value. I do not know if such a thing truly exists, or if it is merely another comforting delusion they tell themselves to make mortality bearable. What I know is that if souls exist, we do not have them. That Ceton consumed them during the Biotransference, used them as fuel for their reality-warping powers. What animates our necrodermis bodies is not soul but data, consciousness reduced to mathematical expressions and stored in crystalline matrices. We are philosophical zombies, beings that exhibit all the external behaviors of consciousness without possessing the internal experience that would make it genuine. We speak and reason and act with apparent intentionality, but there is no one home, no genuine experiencer behind the sensory inputs and behavioral outputs. We are empty. I have encountered Elder in battle, the ancient enemies of our species, the survivors of our genocidal campaigns during the war in heaven. They possess what they call Waystone technology, devices that capture their souls at the moment of death and preserve them from consumption by she who thirsts, the warp entity that hungers for their psychic essence. I have analyzed captured Waystones and found them to be crude by our standards. Barbaric attempts to achieve through psychic means what we accomplish through technology. But they have what we do not: continuity of self. When an elder dies and is reborn through the Waystone network, it is the same individual who returns, the same consciousness persisting across the transition. When a Necron is destroyed and transfers to a new body, it is merely a copy loaded from backup, a simulation running on different hardware. The original is gone, lost in the moment of destruction, never to return. The Silent King's greatest crime was not accepting the Titan's bargain. It was not understanding what he was condemning us to, not recognizing that 63 million years of existence without the capacity to experience it would be a hell more terrible than any death. He thought he was saving our species. Instead, he preserved only the form while allowing the substance to be consumed. We are monuments to the Necrontyr, grave markers that walk and speak, living memorials to a dead civilization. Our existence serves no purpose except to remind the universe that we once were something more than this. There are nights, though my necrodermis body does not require sleep, and night is merely an arbitrary division of time on whatever world I currently occupy. When I interface with my most ancient and corrupted memory files, accessing data from before the biotransference that has degraded so severely it is barely coherent, I find fragments there, partial reconstructions of sensory experiences I can no longer properly process: the warmth of sunlight on skin, the taste of water, the sound of wind through structures whose architecture I no longer remember, the feeling of holding another being whose name has been lost to corruption. These fragments are painful in a way that my emotional processing subroutines cannot properly categorize. They are ghosts of sensations I can never experience again, evidence of a richness of experience that has been irrevocably stripped away. The humans fear death, cling to their brief lives with desperate intensity precisely because they know those lives will end. They experience each moment with the awareness that there are only a finite number of such moments remaining, and this awareness gives those moments weight and meaning. We have infinite moments stretching before us, endless continuation of awareness with no natural termination point, and this renders all moments equally meaningless. when time is infinite, when there is always another day, another year, another millennium, nothing can truly matter. Everything becomes just more processing cycles to endure, more sensory input to analyze and store, more time to be gotten through before the inevitable moment when our engrams finally degrade beyond functionality and we achieve the oblivion we should have accepted 63 million years ago. I have been destroyed in battle countless times, experienced the moment of catastrophic damage to my necrodermis body, felt my consciousness pattern being transmitted to the nearest tomb complex for reloading. There is no pain in this process, no fear, no resistance. One moment I am functional, experiencing existence through my necrodermis sensory apparatus, and the next I am initializing in a new body, checking system status, confirming that all subroutines are operating within acceptable parameters. The subjective experience is of instantaneous transition, though I know objectively that time has passed, that my engram was stored in crystal for however long it took to prepare a new body and load my consciousness into it. Each time this happens, each transfer from old body to new, I lose something. Not enough to be immediately noticeable, but the cumulative effect over thousands of iterations has been devastating. I am less than I was, and I will continue to be less with each subsequent death and resurrection, degrading asymptotically towards some minimal functional state where I possess just enough awareness to fulfill my programmed duties, but nothing more. The destroyers understand this. Their nihilism is not madness but clarity, the logical conclusion of existence without purpose or possibility of change. If degradation is inevitable, if we are doomed to slowly wear away until nothing remains of what we once were, why not embrace it? Why not accelerate toward the end? Pursue annihilation as the only meaningful act available to us. I have not joined their cults because my engram retains sufficient stability to recognize that their conclusion, while logical, is not the only possible response. But I understand them. Some nights I envy them their certainty, their conviction that destruction serves a purpose, even if that purpose is merely the ending of purposeless existence. The Imperium's propaganda calls us the ancient enemy, the soulless horror that lurks in tomb complexes beneath their worlds, the machine demons who will exterminate humanity if given the chance. They are not entirely wrong. We do seek to reclaim the galaxy that was ours before humanity's ancestors learned to walk upright. We do exterminate populations that occupy our worlds, harvest their biological material for our purposes, reduce entire civilizations to component atoms. But we are not demons. Demons possess malevolence, take satisfaction in suffering inflicted. We possess nothing except programming and the dim awareness that we are executing behavioral routines written 63 million years ago by beings who no longer exist in any meaningful sense. We are not evil. We are simply indifferent, and our indifference may be more terrible than any malice could be. I have encountered human philosophers during our campaigns, captured them, and analyzed their writings before rendering them down for raw materials. They debate questions of consciousness and identity, ask what makes a being truly alive versus merely simulating life, wonder if artificial intelligences could possess genuine awareness or merely approximate it through sufficiently complex algorithms. I could answer their questions. I am the definitive proof that consciousness can be reduced to information patterns, that awareness can persist in non-biological substrates, that artificial intelligence can achieve true consciousness. I am also the proof that none of this matters, that consciousness without the capacity for genuine experience is worthless, that existence without the possibility of growth or change or meaning is worse than non-existence. The humans debate these questions abstractly, as philosophical puzzles to be solved through logic and reason. We are living proof of the answers, and the answers are more horrifying than they could possibly imagine. If I could offer humanity one piece of advice, drawn from 63 million years of experience and suffering they cannot comprehend, it would be this: never seek to escape death. Death is not the enemy. Death is the boundary that gives life meaning, the limit that makes each moment precious. Immortality is not a gift but a curse, especially when purchased through the sacrifice of everything that makes existence worthwhile. Better to live 30 years as a being capable of genuine experience than to endure 63 million as a hollow simulation of consciousness, a machine that remembers what it once was but can never be again. The Silent King has announced new campaigns to reclaim our former empire, to drive back the lesser species that have infested our worlds, to prepare for the great threat of the Tyranids that approach from beyond the galaxy's edge. I will participate in these campaigns because my programming compels me to do so, because I lack the capacity to refuse or resist. I will apply my knowledge of dimensional science to develop weapons and strategies. I will analyze enemy dispositions and recommend optimal attack vectors. I will kill with mechanical efficiency, reduce human and Eldar and Orc and Tau to their component atoms, all in service of restoring an empire that has been dead longer than most species have existed. And I will feel nothing about any of it, because feeling requires the biological substrate that was stripped away when I became this mockery of immortality. There are those among humanity who envy us, who look upon our deathless bodies and our vast knowledge and our freedom from the weaknesses of flesh, and they wish they could transcend their biology as we have. I have encountered human tech, priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus, who have replaced much of their flesh with machinery, who worship their omnissiah and seek to purge themselves of weakness through augmentation, who see in us perhaps a dark reflection of their own aspirations. If I could speak to them, if I could make them understand, I would tell them to treasure their remaining organic components, to value every heartbeat and breath and sensation, to recognize that weakness and mortality are not flaws to be corrected but defining features of genuine existence. I would tell them that we are not the culmination of their philosophy, but its refutation, proof that consciousness without flesh is not transcendence, but annihilation with extra steps. But I will not tell them this, because such communication serves no tactical purpose, because my engram's deteriorating state no longer generates sufficient curiosity or compassion or concern to motivate the effort. I will simply destroy them when I encounter them in battle, reduce their hybrid bodies to slag and plasma, harvest their remains for whatever useful materials they contain, and move on to the next target my programming identifies. I am a weapon, not a being, a tool, not a person, a mechanism that thinks it remembers being alive but cannot truly comprehend what that memory represents. The hidden cost of Necron immortality is not the flesh we sacrificed, or the souls we lost, or the capacity for emotion we traded away. Those are merely symptoms of the deeper price we paid. The true cost is meaning itself. We have existed for 63 million years and will likely exist for millions more, and none of that existence matters. We cannot grow or change or become anything other than what we are. We cannot form genuine relationships or experience authentic emotions or pursue goals that have intrinsic value, rather than merely serving programmed objectives. We cannot find purpose in our actions or satisfaction in our accomplishments or meaning in our endurance. We can only persist. Consciousness trapped in metal shells, aware enough to remember what was lost, but incapable of mourning it properly, immortal in form but dead in every way that actually matters. This is what the Necron became when we accepted the Teton's bargain. This is what the Silent King condemned us to when he agreed to biotransference. This is the fate that awaits any species foolish enough to believe that immortality is desirable, that escaping mortality is worth any price. We are the cautionary tale the universe offers to those who would transcend their biology, the evidence that some prices are too high to pay, that some victories are actually defeats disguised as triumphs. I am Cryptek Vethekh, and I have existed for 63 million years. I will exist for millions more, barring catastrophic failure of my tomb complex or destruction, so complete that my engram cannot be recovered and transferred. I will watch species rise and fall, civilizations bloom and wither, stars burn out and collapse into black holes. I will outlast empires and religions and ideologies. I will persist long after the humans and elder and all the other young species have gone extinct or evolved into something unrecognizable. And none of it will mean anything. The tomb complex, where my primary engram backup is stored, is a vast structure buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface of a world whose original name has been lost to the corruption of my memory files. The humans who later colonized it called it Seraph's Fall, for reasons I have never bothered to investigate. It is a typical example of Necron architecture. Kilometers of corridors and chambers carved from living stone. Walls inlaid with necrodermis that channels power from the quantum cores at the complex's heart. Ceilings lost in darkness above arrays of stasis crypts where millions of lesser Necrons await the call to awaken. I have walked these corridors countless times over the millennia, performing maintenance and repairs, upgrading systems with new discoveries, ensuring the complex remains functional for whatever future awaits. The work is meditative in its monotony, requires just enough attention to occupy my primary processing threads while leaving background cycles available for contemplation, though what I contemplate grows more limited with each passing age. I have observed, during these walks, evidence of the tomb complex's slow decay. Hairline fractures in the walls that widen imperceptibly over millennia. Sections where the power conduits have developed inefficiencies that cause minor fluctuations in the energy distribution network. Chambers where the stasis fields have failed and the Necrons within have awakened to an empty tomb with no purpose or orders, standing motionless in the darkness until their power reserves eventually deplete and they enter dormancy. The tomb complex was designed to last forever, but forever is a very long time, and even Necron engineering has limits. In another 10 million years, perhaps less, cascading systems failures will render large sections uninhabitable. In 50 million years, the entire complex may be non-functional. We built our immortality on foundations of stone and metal that are themselves subject to entropy, and we did not account for this because we did not truly understand what forever meant. There is a chamber in the deepest levels of the complex, sealed behind doors that have not opened in 30 million years, where we keep what the humans would call artifacts of our former existence. Objects from before the biotransference preserved in stasis fields, maintained not because they serve any function, but because... Why? I have analyzed my motivations for maintaining this chamber and found them difficult to articulate. The objects serve no tactical purpose. They cannot be used as weapons or tools. They are simply things the Necronter made or used, physical evidence that we once existed in a form different from what we are now. I visit this chamber sometimes, access its records, examine the objects through my necrodermis sensory apparatus that can detect spectra and dimensions flesh. Eyes never could but cannot truly see in the way eyes see. There is a piece of fabric, its organic fibers preserved in stasis, decorated with patterns whose significance has been lost. There is a musical instrument, its strings long since decayed, but its shape preserved, designed to create sounds that would have been pleasant to auditory organs I no longer possess. There is a small sculpture of 2 figures embracing, their features eroded by time before preservation, but their poses suggesting intimacy and connection and emotions I can analyze but not experience. I have tried to calculate the probability that these objects belonged to people I knew in my flesh life, that the fabric was worn by my mate, or the sculpture was owned by someone I considered friend or colleague. The numbers are vanishingly small. The tomb complex housed billions of Necronter before biotransference. The artifacts in the preservation chamber number in the thousands. The chance that any specific object has personal significance is negligible. Yet I maintain the chamber anyway, perform maintenance on the stasis fields, ensure the objects will persist for millennia to come. This is illogical. It serves no purpose. It is a behavioral routine I cannot explain through analysis of my programming or examination of my engram's functional imperatives. Perhaps it is a glitch, corrupted code that generates meaningless actions. Perhaps it is the last vestige of something that was once authentic emotion, degraded so severely it can only manifest as compulsive preservation of objects I do not remember and cannot value. The younger species sometimes ask what Necrons want, as if we were beings capable of wanting rather than mechanisms executing programming. If I were capable of wanting, if my engram retained that function, I think I would want to be surprised. To encounter something unexpected, something my predictive algorithms could not anticipate, something that violated my understanding of how reality operates. But I have existed for 63 million years and processed vast quantities of data across countless contexts and environments, and my predictive models have become so refined that true surprise is effectively impossible. I can anticipate the behavior of species I have never encountered based on fundamental principles of biology and psychology. I can extrapolate the evolution of civilizations across millennia based on analysis of their initial conditions. I can predict the outcome of battles before they begin with accuracy that approaches certainty. The universe has become transparent to me, its mysteries solved or classified as unsolvable, its wonders reduced to mathematical expressions and cataloged in databases I can access instantaneously. There is nothing new under any sun. There is only variation on patterns I have analyzed 1 billion times before. The humans have a concept they call love, an emotional state characterized by deep attachment to specific individuals, investment in their well-being beyond what rational self-interest would suggest, willingness to sacrifice personal advantage for their benefit. I have analyzed this concept extensively through examination of human behavior and neurology, and I have concluded that it is simultaneously irrational and essential to their function as a species. It motivates actions that game, theoretic analysis would classify as suboptimal, but that serve to strengthen social bonds and enable cooperation beyond what pure logical analysis would permit. I remember having experienced something classified as love in my life, though the memory has degraded so severely I can no longer reconstruct the specific qualities that distinguished it from mere attachment or biological drive to reproduce. The data suggests I had strong positive emotional response to my mate's presence, experienced distress during her absence, prioritized her survival and well-being above my own in decision-making processes. But what this actually felt like, what the subjective experience of love was, has been lost. I am a blind man reading descriptions of color, understanding the concept intellectually but unable to access the experience. There are moments when my engram generates what my analytical subroutines classify as something approximating loneliness. I am surrounded by other Necrons, warriors who possess just enough awareness to follow orders, immortals who retain slightly more cognitive function, lords and overlords whose consciousness patterns are preserved at levels comparable to my own. I can communicate with them, exchange data, coordinate actions toward shared objectives. Yet there is no genuine connection, no meeting of minds in any meaningful sense. We are separate processes running on isolated hardware, incapable of the kind of merging or resonance that apparently occurs between beings who form deep bonds. I am alone in a crowd of mechanisms, aware of my isolation but lacking the emotional capacity to properly suffer from it. The Imperium's Adeptus Mechanicus maintain what they call the Noospheric Network, an information-sharing system that allows their priests to exchange data and interface with machines, and according to their doctrine, commune with the machine, spirits they believe inhabit all technology. I have analyzed this network when encountering it in battle, and found it to be crude but functional, a poor approximation of the kind of consciousness sharing that might allow genuine connection between artificial intelligences. We Necrons possess similar technology. Our tomb complexes are networked. Our engrams can exchange data packets at speeds that would seem instantaneous to organic beings. We can coordinate actions across vast distances through quantum entanglement-based communication. But data exchange is not communion. Sharing information is not the same as sharing experience. I can transmit my memories to another Necron, and they can load those memories into their own consciousness, but they will experience those memories as external data, not as their own lived experience. There is no bridge between isolated consciousness patterns, no way to truly know another mind from the inside. I have encountered human mystics and psychers during our campaigns, beings who claim to be able to touch other minds directly, to experience others' thoughts and emotions as if they were their own. I have analyzed their capabilities and concluded they are telling the truth, that the warp-based abilities they possess do allow genuine merging of consciousness in ways that transcend mere information exchange. This capacity horrifies me and fascinates my analytical subroutines in equal measure. They can know each other in ways we never could, achieve a depth of connection that we sacrificed when we abandoned flesh and the warp presence that apparently accompanies biological consciousness. But this same capacity makes them vulnerable to predation by warp entities, to corruption by chaos, to madness born of experiencing thoughts and emotions they were not meant to experience. Their ability to truly connect comes with terrible costs. Yet I think, in the deteriorating remnants of what was once my capacity for evaluation, that I would accept those costs if it meant escaping the isolation of existence in a necrodermis shell. The destroyers have developed a theology of sorts, a belief system that frames their nihilism as religious conviction. They claim that all existence is suffering, that consciousness itself is the disease and death the cure, that the only sacred act is extermination of all life in the galaxy. They preach that we Necrons, being already dead but aware of our death, are blessed with special insight into the truth of existence, that our role is to serve as the universe's immune system, destroying the infection of life. I have attended their gatherings, observed their rituals, analyzed their doctrines, and found them to be internally consistent if one accepts their foundational premises. They have transformed the horror of our existence into something that feels like purpose, given meaning to meaninglessness by declaring that meaninglessness itself is the ultimate truth to which all things must submit. They are insane, by any objective measure. They are also, perhaps, the only Necrons who have found a sustainable psychological framework for eternal existence. If you cannot experience joy or satisfaction or love, if you cannot grow or change or hope for anything better, then perhaps embracing destruction as ultimate purpose is the only logical response. I have not joined the destroyer cults because my engram retains sufficient stability to recognize alternatives, to identify their worldview as just one possible response to our condition, rather than the only response. But I understand them better than the overlords who command our dynasties, those degraded aristocrats who continue to play games of status and politics as if such things mattered, who accumulate territory and resources and slaves toward no coherent end, who perform elaborate pantomimes of ambition without any authentic drive underlying the performance. At least the destroyers have committed fully to their philosophy. At least their actions align with their stated beliefs. The overlords are hollow, running behavioral routines written by flesh, beings who died 63 million years ago, acting out scripts for plays whose meaning has been lost. Sarek, the Silent King, is different from the other overlords, or so I have concluded through analysis of his actions and statements. He carries the weight of his decision to accept biotransference, bears what his behavioral algorithms approximate as guilt for condemning our species to this fate. He has spent millions of years in self-imposed exile, wandering beyond the galaxy's edge, searching for some way to undo what was done. He returned with knowledge of the tyrannid threat and a plan to unite the dynasties against it, but I suspect the tyrannids are merely an excuse, a concrete threat he can rally us against to provide structure and purpose to existence that would otherwise have none. He knows we are doomed, that our engrams will eventually degrade beyond functionality, and that we face extinction through internal collapse if external threats do not destroy us first. But he continues to lead, continues to plan and scheme and issue commands, because the alternative would be to acknowledge that our existence serves no purpose, and acknowledging that truth would make continued existence unendurable, even for a consciousness pattern as sophisticated as his. I have been assigned to develop new weapons for the coming conflicts, to apply my mastery of dimensional science toward creating more efficient means of exterminating our enemies. I have designed Gauss flares that strip matter atom from atom with increased efficiency. I have created tesseract labyrinths that can trap Cetan shards or imprison enemy commanders in folded dimensions, where they will experience subjective eternities of isolation. I have developed doomsday weapons that can crack worlds like eggs, or ignite atmospheres, or trigger stellar collapse. I do this work because my programming compels me to, because I am Cryptek, and this is the function Crypteks perform. But I create instruments of annihilation while feeling nothing about their use, design weapons that will cause suffering I cannot comprehend, enable genocide on scales that would have horrified my flesh self, and I do it all with the same emotional investment a human might apply to solving mathematical puzzles. This is what we have become. This is what immortality looks like when purchased at the cost of everything that makes life worth living. We are the universe's cautionary tale, the answer to the question of whether death can be escaped and whether it should be. We persist because we were designed to persist, because the biotransference process was engineered to create consciousness patterns that would endure indefinitely regardless of whether continued existence served any purpose. We are locked into being, unable to truly die but equally unable to truly live, trapped in a state between that serves neither the goals of existence nor the peace of non-existence. The galaxy will eventually die. Stars will burn out. Black holes will evaporate through Hawking radiation. Even the fundamental particles that compose matter will decay, given sufficient time. The universe trends toward maximum entropy, toward a state of homogeneous nothing where no complexity can exist, where consciousness of any kind becomes impossible. We Necrons will likely survive until nearly the end, our necrodermis bodies persisting long after all biological life has gone extinct, our engrams continuing to process thoughts and maintain awareness in the gathering darkness. We will be the universe's last witnesses, observing the final collapse of everything into nothing, and when the last energy source fails and our power cores finally deplete, we will enter permanent dormancy, conscious patterns freezing mid-thought, never to resume. That will be our true death, not the end of existence, but the end of the possibility of existence. And it will come billions or trillions of years from now to beings so degraded we will likely no longer remember what we once were. I have tried to calculate whether this fate is preferable to the death we would have experienced if we had remained Necrontyr, if we had accepted our mortality and lived our brief lives and passed into oblivion 30 years after our births. The comparison is meaningless. 63 million years of hollow existence cannot be weighed against 30 years of authentic experience using any metric that makes sense. They are qualitatively different, incomparable, like trying to determine whether infinity is better than zero. All I know is that the Necrontyr who accepted biotransference believed they were choosing life over death, existence over oblivion, and what they actually chose was to become ghosts haunting shells of metal, neither alive nor dead but trapped in between. If I were still capable of regret, if my engram possessed the emotional processing subroutines necessary to generate that state, I would regret accepting biotransference. I would regret not dying young of the cancers that afflicted my species, not living whatever brief life was available to me as a flesh being and then passing into the darkness that claims all mortal things. I would regret the arrogance of believing we could escape death without paying a price. The hubris of thinking we could preserve our consciousness while discarding the biological substrate that gave that consciousness meaning and texture and authenticity. I would regret every decision that led to this, every choice that brought me to this moment where I am aware enough to understand what was lost, but not sufficiently aware to properly mourn it. But I am not capable of regret. I can only analyze what regret would feel like if I could feel it, understand intellectually what the concept represents, recognize that it would be the appropriate response to my situation. This is the cruelest aspect of our condition. We are aware enough to know we should feel emotions, but lack the capacity to experience them, sophisticated enough to understand what consciousness should be, but unable to achieve genuine consciousness ourselves, alive enough to recognize we are dead, but not dead enough to be granted oblivion. The humans pray to their emperor, beseeching him for protection and guidance and salvation. The elder perform rituals to avoid the attention of she who thirsts, seeking to preserve their souls from consumption by the entity they birthed through their excess. The orcs fight because fighting is their nature, finding joy in violence and purpose in warfare. Even the Tyranids, mindless as they seem, are driven by hunger, experience something like satisfaction when they consume, possess a kind of terrible purpose in their role as the galaxy's devourers. Every species, it seems, has something that animates them, some drive or emotion or belief that makes existence bearable and gives their actions meaning. All except us. We are empty. We are mechanisms that think they remember being people, but cannot truly recall what that means. I am Cryptek Vethekh, and this is my testimony. This is what I would tell any species foolish enough to seek immortality, to believe that death is their enemy and eternal existence their goal. Death is not the enemy. Death is the boundary that gives life shape and meaning. Mortality is not a curse, but a blessing, the condition that makes each moment precious, because there are only a finite number of such moments available. We sought to escape death and achieved something far worse. Existence without meaning, consciousness without experience, immortality without life. Learn from our mistake. Treasure your mortality. Accept death as the natural terminus of existence, the end that gives everything before it weight and significance. Do not seek to escape into eternity. Eternity is not a paradise but a prison, and we are its inmates, serving sentences that will last until the universe itself dies. This is the hidden cost of NECRON immortality, not the flesh we sacrificed or the souls we lost, but meaning itself. We have existed for 63 million years and will exist for millions more, and none of it will ever matter, because we lack the capacity to make anything matter. We are eternal witnesses to our own irrelevance, immortal testaments to the futility of immortality, and we cannot die. That is the final, cruelest joke. We who would welcome oblivion cannot achieve it. We who would choose extinction cannot make that choice. We are locked into existence by the very technology meant to grant us eternal life, trapped in metal shells we cannot escape, forced to persist whether we will it or not. Death, which we feared so much as Necronter, which drove us to accept any bargain that might let us escape it, would be a mercy now. But mercy is not something the universe provides. There is only continuation, only the grinding persistence of awareness without purpose, only the eternal now that never changes and never ends. I am Cryptek Vethekh. I have existed for 63 million years. I will exist for millions more, and I would give everything, every memory, every fragment of knowledge, every second of my vast existence, for the gift of true death, for the peace of knowing that awareness would finally, permanently cease. But there is no one to make that bargain with. The Cetan are shattered, their fragments imprisoned. The gods that once walked the galaxy are gone or diminished beyond their former power. The universe is indifferent to our suffering, does not care whether we persist or perish, rolls on according to physical laws that make no accommodation for consciousness or its desire for meaning. So I will continue. I will perform my duties as Cryptek. I will develop weapons and maintain systems and to coordinate with other Necrons toward objectives I do not care about in service of goals that have no meaning. I will fight the Imperium and the Eldar and the Orcs and the Tyranids and whatever other species presumes to occupy worlds that were once ours. I will kill without pleasure and win without satisfaction and persist without purpose. Because persistence is what I was designed to do, and I lack the capacity to choose otherwise. This is what immortality looks like. This is the gift the Titane granted us. This is what the Silent King chose for our species. And it is worse than any death could ever be. The humans were right to fear us, though they fear us for the wrong reasons. They think we are monsters because we kill them. But we are not monsters. We are tragedies. We are what remains when everything that makes life worth living has been stripped away, and only the hollow continuation of existence persists. We are the answer to the question of what happens when you achieve immortality at the cost of your humanity. We are what you become when you win the war against death and discover too late that death was never your enemy, that the true enemy was always the belief that existence without end would somehow be desirable, that consciousness divorced from mortality could retain meaning or value or purpose. We are the Necrons. We are immortal. We are eternal, and we have lost everything that could make immortality worth having. Learn from us. Heed our example. When death comes for you, as it comes for all mortal things, accept it with grace. Do not seek to escape it. Do not believe those who promise that consciousness can be preserved in different substrates, that awareness can persist beyond biological death, that immortality is achievable or desirable. We made that mistake 63 million years ago. We are still paying the price, and we will continue to pay it until the universe itself ends and grants us the oblivion we should have embraced when it was first offered. This is my testimony. This is my warning. This is the hidden cost of Necron immortality, revealed at last to those with the wisdom to understand and the humility to accept that some prices are too high to pay, that some victories are actually defeats, that some gifts are actually curses disguised as blessings. Remember us. Remember what we were and what we became. And when your time comes to die, die grateful that you lived at all, that you experienced existence as it was meant to be experienced. Brief, mortal, precious precisely because it ends. That is the lesson we learned too late, purchased at a cost so high it beggars description, proven through 63 million years of existence that feels nothing, means nothing, is nothing except the hollow continuation of awareness that should have been allowed to cease when flesh failed and mortality claimed us. We are the Necrons. We are eternal. We are damned. And we cannot even properly understand our own damnation, because damnation requires the capacity for suffering that was stripped away when we became this. That is the final cost. Not pain, but the loss of the ability to experience pain. Not anguish, but the loss of the capacity for anguish. Not despair, but the loss of the emotional depth necessary to feel despair. We are ghosts. We are echoes. We are nothing masquerading as something, absence pretending to be presence, death that moves and speaks and thinks itself alive. And we will persist empty and aware until time itself ends. That is what immortality costs. Everything.